let's go ahead and get started. Um, Hi, my name is Anna Limina. I am an intern at Harmonic Changes Music Therapy Services. And today I am going to be presenting an open studio on the topic of diversity and inclusion. So let me just share my screen. And I just wanted everyone to know that this presentation is being recorded. I'm not sure if participants are being recorded as well, but with that information, feel free to keep your camera on or off, whatever's comfortable for you. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So, diversity inclusion. So I'm here today to discuss a topic that many of us might find uncomfortable, and that is diversity and inclusion. I am sharing this from the perspective of a white cisgendered woman who has had access to education, higher education to be specific, to be able to pursue a music therapy degree. While we should be listening to voices of minorities and the underrepresented, it's important for majorities like myself to take time to reflect and talk to our peers and colleagues about how we can make music therapy more inclusive for our colleagues, coworkers, and most importantly, our clients. While doing this work, regardless of our personal identity, it's crucial that we keep an open mind and that we practice humility. And the goal of my presentation today is to remind us all that no matter how much inner work that we're doing, we can always be doing more work on our biases and to make the music therapy community more inclusive and diverse to help our colleagues and clients thrive and for our field to grow. So this is just an overview of all the different things we're going to be talking about today. If you have any questions at any point, feel free to put them in the chat or just any thoughts if anything comes up. And yeah, here we go. So intersectionality, something that is brought up a lot in school and training as mental health workers, as healthcare workers. So as music therapists, we value each individual for their own uniqueness and creativity, especially at Harmonic Changes. There are so many things that make up a human being, including their ethnicity, their gender, their religion, class, age, culture, sexuality, and ability. The list goes on and on. So intersectionality is acknowledging that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression within those communities and areas of life that they identify with. So taking all of those things into consideration, dynamic systems of privilege and oppression play a role in the therapeutic process of the client and therapist relationship. So the American Music Therapy Association states that in a therapeutic relationship, the music therapist must demonstrate awareness of the influence of race, ethnicity, language, religion, marital status, gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, age, ability, socioeconomic status, or political affiliation on the therapeutic process. So what does that mean? We are looking at our clients as unique individuals, and we are taking account of their own experiences in life and how it affects them outside of the session and inside the session, and how we can help them achieve their goals. And yeah, and so how do we do that? So once we are more aware of our own intersecting axes of privilege, domination, and oppression, we will be more likely to view and interact with our clients from an integrated and distinctly individual perspective. So think about what makes up your personal identity and how much have you educated yourself outside of your personal identity. Some food for thought as we go through this presentation. So, multicultural music. So, multicultural refers to a part of a person's race, ethnicity, age, gender, sexual orientation, language, religious or spiritual affiliation. marital status, ability, education, socioeconomic status, affiliation, and lifestyle. Very similar to intersectionality. The term multicultural indicates contrasting identities interacting or relating to one another in some way. So we have all these moving parts as individuals, and how do they come into play when interacting with each other. Um, and as skilled musicians, we know that each culture has its own unique relationship with music. Each culture has its own style and relationship to music and carries different meaning for various communities. The main modality in music therapy is obviously music and the representation of a specific culture, the self, and the society to which the individual belongs. If you are unfamiliar with a client's culture, it will be very challenging to establish a strong therapeutic relationship. Um, so as music therapists, we should be constantly learning about clients' various cultural needs and musical preferences and just different cultures. So we're ready for anyone that we work with as a colleague or a client. For example, if you're an English speaker and you grew up in your childhood listening to American English music, um, it will be a little different for a client who was raised in a Spanish speaking household or any other language or culture, the different childhood songs that can come up. And another example of this is a client from Eastern culture having varying connotation to cadences and chord progressions that we experience in Western music, and just everyday nuances in culture and how we interact. That being said, take into consideration the strengths and limitations that Western ethnocentric theories and values in which music therapy, counseling, and psychology were founded. Some of these values are autonomy, assertiveness, verbal articulation, and individualization. They're all based in white culture mostly, but be aware that other cultures have different values. A lot of cultures won't be like, oh, cut off this toxic relationship in your life. It's a lot of cultures are very community based, and how can you consider that when working with your clients and helping them to achieve their goals? So during assessment, treatment, and termination, cultural misunderstanding can take place at any time. And misunderstanding can negatively affect the development of a therapeutic relationship and the establishment of an effective treatment plan. So right now, just take some time to examine your own personal cultural values and how they may be in conflict with those of your clients and your peers and colleagues. How has your culture influenced your personal music preferences? And how is that translated into your sessions? So when you're session planning, what are you looking at? Like, what are you using to uplift our clients? And with reflection and education, we can develop authentic skills and multicultural empathy. Yeah. So systematic oppression and music therapy, how do they relate? So I have a little YouTube video, but I think I'll come back to it later if we do have time, because I've got a lot to cover. And at the end of this, I have a little Google Doc of resources that you can use and look at to further your education and understanding of everything I've covered today. So systemic racism is a form of racism that is in laws and regulations of society or organizations, and it manifests as discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, education, and political representation. So we live in the United States, in a country with a system built to oppress specific demographics. Many Americans experience systemic racism, patriarchy, homophobia, classism, and ableism in their day-to-day lives. And it's no secret that the United States was built to cater to the majority white, cisgendered people who are upper to middle class. And take a second to think about how many people go to therapy regularly and the connotations that come with that. If you're white or if you're from any cultural background. So when we're navigating ourselves as music therapists through a society that oppresses minorities, we have to educate ourselves on how these factors are influencing our colleagues and clients' lives. We can't ignore how systemic racism has impacted music itself, um, and even further, how it's affecting music therapy as a profession and practice. When a system is built against specific demographics, it makes it more difficult to have access to higher education, and less minority students in the music therapy classroom means less music therapists who aren't the privileged minority, then leading to less representation and access to all clients. Um, and considering racism, it can be, and just any discrimination in general, with all the things we talked about earlier, um, racism can be a cause for a person's mental health diagnosis, such as PTSD, depression, anxiety, just to name a few. So this is a graph from a really great book that I used for this presentation, and I really recommend that we all read if we're working with anyone in the mental health or healthcare world. It's called Cultural Section, Intersections in Music Therapy, Music Health and the Person. I have a link for it in the resources at the end, and this is from that. So just take a second to look at this, and it's like privilege and societal norms and all the different things that come into play, and who's oppressed and who is more like on top in society, and who society has been built to cater to. So take a second to look at that and think about where you fall in this graph. And yeah. So then I have this little chart. It's from the American Music Therapy Association's research journal, and it's from 2019. So it's how the ethnicities of board certified music therapists that are currently practicing and in the field. So let's take a second to look at this and notice what the 85% of music therapists are, and it's white, Caucasian, European descent. And look how small everyone else is represented when it comes to ethnicity. And why is that a problem? And like I said before, it's a problem because that means we don't have as much perspective of different cultures when we're working in the field. We can make clients of minorities feel alienated and underrepresented, and you're not going to go to a therapist in general that you don't think will be able to relate to you and understand your life experiences, because everyone has unique ways that they experience the world. So if we get this to be a little bit more even, we'll be able to access so many more clients and have higher quality services to provide. And this is just our access to education and services based on race and ethnicity. It's household income, little graph. This is also from 2018. So there are obviously different advantages when it comes to finances, and that translates into who can attend college without going into crazy debt, and who can afford mental health services in general and healthcare in general. And so how does that affect our fields? A lot of different ways. Yeah, so just take a second to consider like how someone's income and their race can hinder their access to education and services. And then this is another graph from that research journal that the American Music Therapy Association did. And it's discussing gender. It's no secret if you're in the field of music therapy that it has been predominantly white women, specifically white cisgender women. We have 87% female and 12% male. 1% genderqueer, gender nonconforming, 0% transgender on that graph, um, which is a lack of representation to a lot of people. And with that lack of representation, it's a lack of knowledge and experience that could push our field forward. Cool. So now that we've acknowledged that a college degree costs a lot of money, getting any college degree is expensive. Music therapy is really expensive to attend a liberal arts school, and that stigma that comes with studying music in general. And not only paying for school, you do internship, and a lot of the times they're not paid, or and that can make it really inaccessible to people from lower incomes. So obtaining a music therapy degree is expensive, and not everyone has equal opportunity to become a board certified music therapist. In many cultures, being able to pursue a career in music is seen as a luxury. Even as a well-trained music therapist, we all fall victim to bias, stereotyping, classism, racism, heterism, ageism, ableism. The list can go on and on. And increasing the awareness of your personal bias can help, and your privilege can help diminish the negative effects of bias when we're working with colleagues and clients. Our personal biases for race, ethnicity, language, religion, social class, family experiences, sexual orientation, gender identity, and social organizations can negatively impact our assessment and treatment process with clients. And think about the data that we use when we're researching. Who was the data conducted on, like what demographics, who's being represented in the work that we're doing and data that we're using. Racial, ethnic, gender, and sexual minorities often suffer from poor mental health because of inaccessibility of quality mental health care services, cultural stigma surrounding mental health care, discrimination, and overall lack of awareness about mental health. Again, think about, if you're a music therapist or music therapy intern or student, think about who you're seeing as you're going through your training, who has access to your services, and just take a second to think about their privileges and their cultures and backgrounds as well, and how they got to be able to become your client or colleague. And so from that book, I was talking about cultural intersections of music therapy, music health, and the person. I have a little quote, and it says that building upon the ideas of feminism, critical race theory, cultural-centered music therapy, disability studies, and multiculturalism, it becomes imperative that music therapists understand the complexities of cultural issues that impact their perspectives and personal bias in the therapeutic setting. So again, let's think about how have your personal life experiences affected the way that you interact with your clients and your colleagues, and what are your biases and how can you address them? And that can be really hard, uncomfortable work, but it's super important that we do this, because lack of diversity and inclusion in music therapists can limit not only the number of clients we can treat, but the quality of our services. Awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about music and racism. Many of us view music as a universal language that brings people from various backgrounds together. However, too often, many styles of music have been appropriated and stolen from minorities. I could talk about this for a really long time. There's a lot of research behind it. But just one quick example, the famous song Hound Dog, most of you would remember it being performed and recorded by Elvis. He received a lot of credit for it throughout history, but its original performer is Big Mama Thornton, a Black woman, astounding singer and songwriter, and along with Otis Blackwell, who wrote several of Elvis's big hits, but a lot of people don't know those names. They just know Elvis's name. Even children's songs that seem innocent can carry a harmful history. For example, the song Five Little Monkeys Jumping on the Bed. I used to use that all the time in sessions. It originally was used to oppress Black people, and it contained a racial slur. Very disturbing information to like find out, especially with children's songs. But just being aware of these types of things can make your sessions that much more inclusive, and you're not making anybody feel uncomfortable simply by being ignorant. We have to educate ourselves on what is healing and what is harmful when it comes to our repertoire's history and purpose. As music therapists, we must understand the history behind our material. If our repertoires only include music from our own culture, how can we be effective to all of our clients? So we can educate ourselves in songs that have been rooted in racism and discrimination. Examples of this, and this is in the resource list, it's a Google document called Songs with a Questionable Past. It was compiled by Lauren McDougall. And like I said, I Little Monkeys Jumping on the Bed. Oh, Susanna, that's also a song rooted in white supremacy and racism. And the song Dixieland, that was a theme song for the Confederacy. And I have an anecdote from the New England Music Therapy Regional Conference, where a Black music therapy student walked into a conference room, and she was the only woman of color in the room, and the entire conference meeting started singing Dixieland, and she talked about her experience with that, and she felt very alienated and discouraged from being a music therapist at all. And going forward, we don't want to create those scenarios for our colleagues or for our clients. So this brings us to our question, what can we do? There are many paths we can take to become an effective ally to non-dominant groups. It starts with ourselves, right? We have to do that inner work before we can help others. The same way with self-care, you got to make sure your glass is full before you pour it out for others. We must become self-aware of our own biases, all of our privileges, and how our personal perspective of the world affects how we interact with colleagues and clients. We can listen to and uplift voices that aren't heard in theory or research. We can read and engage with texts of critical theory scholars and activists such as feminist theory, disability studies, critical race theory, queer theory, and growing fields like transgender studies. We can start and join in critical discussion with colleagues about how we can make the profession more representative and affirming for members of marginalized and underrepresented groups. This is a very important topic to me, and I talk a lot about it with my colleagues in school and throughout my internship. And we can create and use culturally competent music therapy assessments. That was something interesting I've never really thought about, like how our assessments are rooted in bias as well and cater to specific demographics. We can carry out culturally responsive research, including thorough collaborations with members of underrepresented groups in the field, and we can insist upon anti-oppressive practice for marginalized clients. Example of that is educating ourselves on anti-racist repertoire and anti-discriminatory repertoire as well. And another big thing is we can create scholarship opportunities for minority music therapy students. Throughout my research for this presentation, the only scholarship that I saw that I included in the resources was for the Black Music Therapy Network, and they have scholarships, grants, internship opportunities for Black music therapy students and Black music therapists. And it'd be cool to see more of that for other demographics as well, more opportunities so we can get more people in the field. Awesome. So another thing I'm passionate about, and I wanted to touch on after we considered all of the things that brought us to where we are when we're considering multiculturalism and intersectionality and how racism impacts music and music therapy in general, is client accessibility. Again, let's think about the clients that you're seeing on a day-to-day basis. How many of them have access to a lot of money? a lot of the time they have access to healthcare because we bill through insurance. We obviously want to get paid for our work. We work really, really hard, but to grow the field and to advocate for others, we want to make it more accessible for everybody. So different ways that we can do this is offer sliding scale options for people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. We can provide telehealth services. That's something that we have been experiencing a lot of in the last 2 years. And it's actually really cool to think about how many more people we can have access to, medically fragile folk, people who aren't as comfortable going into person, who don't have access to going in person sessions. So that's a great way. We can bill services through Medicare and set up a prospective payment system with our clients. We can send practicum students and interns to provide services to low-income clients because we're already doing that for college credit. So I think it'd be a good thing to explore. We can conduct market research in our area and reach out to community centers for minorities to provide services. Just being aware of who our neighbors are, who's around us outside of our little bubble of our own culture and privileges. And another thing we can do is write grants and program proposals to get our foot in the door so we can make music therapy more accessible to all. And yeah, so I'll be putting up a blog post soon on Harmonic Change's website, and it'll include this little Google Doc that I made with all the resources I used for his presentation and just educational resources we can use to educate ourselves. There are self-bias tests, articles, blog posts about diversity and inclusion. I think they're really interesting and very eye-opening. And this work doesn't end after we do our research, after we've read our white fragility books, after we've done everything we think we can. We have to continue to do this every day and engage in that self-exploration, even though it's hard. Listen to others, listen to our peers, listen to minorities, listen to experiences, and speak the truth and advocate and use our privileges if we have them to uplift others. And again, I highly recommend that book. There's a lot of information. It goes into a lot of detail talking about like every single different culture, like Native Americans, Hispanic Latino communities, Asian communities, Black communities, the LGBT community. It has so many things, talks about their cultural perspectives, how they navigate the world in each community, and different musical preferences and just stigmas and expectations within those. And I really recommend reading it. It's very interesting and a good place to start if you're like, I don't know how to expand myself. But yeah. And I'm going to end with a quote from Martin Luther King. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. And again, doing this work, it takes patience, it takes practice. It's hard, it can be embarrassing to really do that inner work, but just practice humility and open mind and patience with yourself as you do this the same way that I have done, putting this presentation together and researching this topic. And yeah, this is social media for Harmonic Changes Therapy Services. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask, put them in the chat. Yeah, thank you all for being here, and I hope that this was informative and helped you become aware of anything. Yeah. Yeah, The Five Little Monkeys is very jarring, and I really recommend looking at that, Google Doc, 'cause it has so many, examples of songs, you're just like, "Oh my gosh," and it goes into detail with research and data about the background of each, topic. Yeah, cool.